Hello again. If you were with us last week, you met Ken Hurst of Prentice Hall International, who was formerly president of Prentice Hall International, Irma Heldman, who has been with a number of publishers and is now a publisher herself, and Jerry Ozer, who also worked for large publishing companies and is now an independent publisher. Last week we looked at a global view of the industry, and now we want to talk a little more specifically about authors, writers, and how they relate to publishers, and I guess how publishers view writers. Irma, I think you're the person who ideally can open up our segment this week, because I know that in addition to your background with Ballantine Books and Holt Rinehart and Winston and Playboy, you also are a very accomplished writer. You've been a film critic for the Wall Street Journal. You have been a book critic or a book reviewer for the Saturday Review of Literature.
Among others.
You now are in the throes of writing a novel. So you can certainly, you are you have been an operating executive in publishing, you have been a publisher, but you also have been a working author.
Been on both sides of the fence.
Been on both sides of the fence, right. How do people become writers? How do people become authors? So what do they do? Go ahead, take it from whatever direction you want.
I don't think you mean how do they become writers. People sit down and write at their typewriter all the time, and as somebody who is starting their own line, you can put an ad in a newspaper and get hundreds of manuscripts which are called slush piles in publishing houses and which are not when you're on your own and an entrepreneur. They're just at your back door. What you mean is, how do you get published, I think, right, Phil?
Okay.
Yeah.
Assuming that you are a writer.
Assuming
How
that
does
you are
one
already
become
a writer.
a published writer?
A published
Very
author.
good. I guess we're ready for the second.
If Irma has written the Phil Bull biography, the story of Phil Bull,
That's right.
what would you do, Elmer? What would you do? Step one.
Or to put it another way, how do you
Ken, that's a loaded question.
how do you get somebody else to put up the money to publish and distribute the book you have written?
Okay, and there are many ways.
Jerry, that's a terrific question, because essentially a writer must earn an income. And how does a writer subsidize himself while he's becoming a writer?
Okay, the reality of it, Phil, except for the few who do make it, and until they make it, most writers do not make a living as writers. They make a living at almost anything else and write despite whatever else it is that they're doing. Because the reality of the economics of publishing is such that it is only a very few, a handful, that do make a living at writing, and it takes a very long time. Or it can be, yes, there can be, you know, the overnight star, and God knows publishing has many of them. By comparison with other industries, not so many of them. But basically, publishing has more really wonderful people who are very talented writers who take many, many, many years to make it and make very small amounts of money making it and then suddenly break through or never break through. And the factors that go into that are, nobody can describe them or even predict them. In fact, there are people,
However,
I think
excuse
you know.
me, I think what Phil was addressing himself to is the person who wants to get published, not necessarily wants to make a living.
Right.
In other words,
Well, but he said, don't say about making a living.
don't try to make a living as a
Whatever you
publisher.
do, don't try to make a living.
As a writer.
Yeah.
But despite the fact, and I think a lot of writers know they cannot make a living as writers, they do want to get published.
I think there are several crucial things, and when I talk about slush pile, which sounds like it's a terrible title, but it is really true. It's called a slush pile, and there's a little
Would you very briefly describe that process again? Some of us may have missed that. A slush pile is?
A slush pile is what happens when you don't know anybody in the publishing industry, you don't have anybody that can get you into a publishing house. So you send blind to a particular publisher. To a
Prentice Hall
an
or
unsolicited manuscript.
It's an unsolicited manuscript, exactly. That goes into what is called the slush pile.
This is where the famous or infamous rejection slip comes from.
If you're lucky, and it's a publishing house that deals with that. Some publishing houses just let it pile up and don't do that. Some publishing houses are more responsible than that. Usually there is a beginner, a little kid who is in charge of the slush pile. Occasionally, and in fact we have Ordinary People as one of the prime examples in recent memory, which was pulled out of the slush pile at Viking by a little kid who said to the senior editor, I think we should pay attention to that. So all is not lost and hope springs eternal, if you want to talk about that, and you're sending Nameless. If you really want to do it, however, and not take that gamble, you should make it your business, whether you go to the library and look at a literary marketplace, which lists all the publishers and the editors at the publishers, or and look at Publishers Weekly, which is sort of the in-house organ of publishing, and find a name and send to a name. That doesn't guarantee that you're going to get more treatment, but somehow it's slightly better. Somehow you've done your homework, and maybe you'll get more attention. Do you agree with that?
I'm appalled. I'm appalled, and have been for years, by the wasted effort on the part of many
Writers?
Many writers or would-be writers. For example, I, from time to time, will get an inquiry as to whether I'm interested in a manuscript. And invariably, I have to say no, because the person has not done his or her homework, has not determined what kind of publisher I am, that is what my fields of interest are, and just sends the inquiry or sometimes sends the manuscript. It bears absolutely no relationship to what I publish.
Do they get that from Literary Marketplace? They get their name from?
They may get the name from Literary Marketplace, but all they've gotten is the name, and they've not read Literary Marketplace carefully.
Where you say, I publish X kind of magazine.
LMP is broken down by by subject matter, field of interest, et cetera,
But so
et cetera.
far we seem to be talking about fiction. 90% of all books published are non-fiction.
That's true.
There I would tell your budding author to send to the publisher his list of table of contents and 1 or 2 sample chapters to show the level of writing, and 2 paragraphs, very important paragraphs, because these will be used if the book's accepted by the publisher's sales force when they call upon the bookstores. Number 1, what the book is about,
Right.
and who it's written for, who is the reader, and secondly, why it is better than any other book published to date in that field. Why it's different. Why is my book, the Phil Ball biography, better than all the other Phil Ball biographies that have appeared in the past?
But I absolutely agree, Ken. What I would say is they have to do their homework, whether they go to a bookstore and see Prentice Hall publishes a lot of books on this particular subject that I'm writing on, or Doubleday, or whatever does that, so that they then target into the proper publisher, because it's silly to send to a publisher that doesn't ever do this.
Or go to their local library and ask the local librarian, who would be delighted to help them. Tell them which publisher publishes in which fields.
Librarians are very helpful and love doing this.
And also they should have a lot of patience and faith and hope, because remember, Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind was turned down by 17 publishers before Macmillan took it out. Who wants another book on the Civil War? Balls are too long. Who's going to read all that? Well, Prentice Hall turned it down too.
Well, but publishing is filled with that. I mean, you could go on with stories about, there are editors all over town who buried their rejection of Lolita, which they got, and they said, what a bad idea. I mean, we have Jonathan Livingston
I want to pick up on something Ken said, because we do want to be helpful to the prospective author.
Yeah, well, that's why I said I have to do their homework.
Now, what Ken is talking about is marketing your own book, in effect, or marketing the concept of the book. Now, one of the vanities, I think it is, of much of the publishing world, is of the editorial world, that is that, well, we don't get involved in marketing. One of the things I discovered very early in the game as an editor is that if you leave marketing to the marketing men, and it was marketing men at the time, the book won't be sold. I think by analogy, an author must be enthusiastic about the book, must make the prospective publisher's life as easy as possible.
And what is the third step, because we're at the end of the segment? Is that it?
All right, no.
Enthusiasm, marketing, and?
Clarity.
Okay.
Make a clear presentation to the publisher.
And definitiveness. And with that, we've hit the end. And patience. And with that, we've hit the end of the segment. Please have the patience to be back with us again next week. We're going to have more commentary on the publishing industry. I'll see you here on the Money Corner again next week. Good night.